Who says there is no such thing as answered prayer? We've gone through 3 already tonight just to get us to this point. So today we're going to be on our 4th installment of our Vision Jesus series. This is something that we've been doing for the last 3 weeks, so this is the 4th one. And this is going to be Pillars in Action. And I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that, especially if you're new here or you don't come here that often, this night is set aside for Bible teaching. So normally you come here and you hear a Bible teaching. That's going to be true tonight as well, but there's going to be a lot of application, way more than normal, right? And we're going to be talking about how we can follow the pillars, basically how we can obey Jesus in the way that we're organized and the way we think about how we go about doing our work. Don't distract the clicker, Ted. Hands off. This is going to be old school. Back in the days where everything wasn't automated, so I'm going to have to say next slide a lot. All right. So, quick review, right? We have 5 pillars that we've been talking about. Next slide. Obeying Jesus, proclaiming Jesus, healing in Jesus' name, making disciples of Jesus, and loving one another like Jesus. Next slide. Along with that, we're going to have tonight's session, which is Pillars in Action. So we're going to describe how we're going to meet those pillars in our church organization, or how we propose to do it. Next slide, please. And there's 3 convictions, 3 quick. Yes. So first and foremost, it's Jesus. It's always Jesus. That's the first thing. Christ and Him crucified is what we are interested in here. We're not going to be changing everything. There's actually some stuff that we've been doing for a long time that's working pretty well. So we don't want to break, or should I say, don't want to fix something that's not broken. And we are going to present a vision for every life stage. Next. Go through 4 more clicks. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to give 4 models, right? Demographic model, organizational structure, discipleship maturity model, and a family strategy. And I will say that tonight is going to be focused on adults. All of our young people are off on some retreat somewhere. So it gives us the time to focus on what we're going to be looking at in terms of adults. Next. So the first thing that I want to bring up is Ephesians 4. So this is going to be kind of the theme throughout this whole presentation, right? It says, so Christ Himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, teachers to equip His peoples for work of good service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith, in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So, we're talking about obeying Christ. Christ gave us gifts, right? And here we have a small list. If you go to Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, you'll find a lot more. Some authors put it as high as 23 different gifts identified in the Bible. This is just a small list of all the gifts that we have. And then in 14 to the end, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is, Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. And so that's what we're hoping to be able to achieve with our models here. First, the demographic model. So what I've done is put together a very brief cartoon of how we go through life. I left out the being born part, but I think you can throw that into preschool. So, what's that?
Next slide.
Oh, next slide. Hey, quit disturbing. Hey, get out of there and quit disturbing the guy that's changing the slides, please. Mason, my son-in-law of all people. So, all right, are we back? Okay, so, Todd told me I'd have to look. It's kind of hard to do. So we have the early years, right? Preschool through middle school. We go off into high school. And in high school, we start breaking away from the family, right? That's where it starts. We go into 9th grade, we're in the family. Go in 12th grade, we're ready to move out. And we go to college, some of us. It's not necessarily the case for everybody. Then we become young, single people, and then we grow up and turn into adults, all right? And that's where we spend, I didn't do the math, most of our lives, I think. So, then we have kids. Kids are optional. Not everybody has kids. Not everybody gets married, but most people do. And so we have the option of having children, and we repeat the cycle. And then as adults, eventually our kids fly the coop, and we're in an empty nest, and we retire and age. This is kind of the American way of doing it. Other countries do it different. But this is what most of us understand. Next. Yes. So we looked at how churches are generally structured. And this would be a typical church. There's a lot of different churches and structures, so we're not saying that every single church out there is like this. There's a lot of variety. But they generally fall into this category where they focus on adults, meaning married people with families. And that tends to be the biggest group in the church and the group that gets all of the attention. Children are typically incidental, meaning, they're valued, right? They're not, pushing the kids out the door or whatever. But they're really treated as like babysitting. You have Sunday school. I'm sure a lot of us have gone through Sunday school. And you grow up and get to high school, and then you rebel and leave. Don't come back. This is actually my story. So I credit my dad with my salvation. Remember that. I credit my dad with my salvation. All right, and so he taught me John 3:16 at a very early age, first memory verse. And then one day we had a youth pastor come through our church, and they had an altar call, and I went up to the altar call, and I officially accepted Christ at the age of 12 years old, right? And I was excited. My dad was in this church. I used to help my dad go to shut-ins and watch Billy Graham crusades and all this other stuff. And I finally got to the point where I could be part of the church, right? And I accepted Christ, and I go, what's next? What stuff do I do? Tell me what the stuff is. And the answer was, well, you come here on Sunday and you sit down in the pew, and that's it. Oh, I got some money. I was a really industrious kid. I had a lot of money for a kid. Paper routes, mowing lawns, all that kind of stuff. I got money. I can give you money. That's fine. It's like, so what's left? There wasn't anything left. That was it. Now, they did make some attempts. They did have a youth ministry that they started up at one time, but it just wasn't, they didn't know what they were doing. It was a good effort. They had their hearts in the right place, but they just weren't able to make it happen. And so that's typical of someone's church experience when you're a child. Again, this is not always the case, and there's a strength here as well, but they do win adults. There's churches that win lots and lots of adults, but they're weak when it comes to the youth, right? They don't lose all of their youth. They don't win all the adults, but that's kind of the thrust of how these churches operate. The typical church. Then we have a very unique situation. This would be our mother church, which is started out as a fish house, went to Xenos, now it's Dwell. They have a very unique focus. This is really unique. Their primary model is a youth model. So they win people in high school, college, and as young singles, right? And it's wildly successful, mainly because they're located next to a massive university in a thriving city, right? So people go to the university, they run into them, they get saved, and they move on, right? However, when it gets to the adult stage, they don't meet the needs of the adults quite the way they meet the needs of the youth. And there's a pattern here, right? Is if you have one model, then that one model works for some, but not everybody. And in this case, it works for the youth. And when it gets to the adult phase, it doesn't apply as much. If you've ever been down there, though, it is a vibrant church. There's lots of adults there. There's adults that have been there for 40, 50 years. So I'm not saying they all just get up and go, right? But the model favors the youth. When the youth lose the adults. And I've also had some personal experience with this, which I'll get into on the next slide. Yes. So this is kind of the path that we took as a church, starting in 1985. So I came up here and attended my first, back then it was called Xenos, but my first meeting in 1985 in November. There's two other people in this audience that have been here longer than me, and that's Indre, Howell, and Lena Morsher, right? Their husbands followed soon afterwards. The Shoops came up, but that's how we started. And who were we? We were people who had been introduced to the church in Columbus that came up as young adults. We came up as young adults. We had a relatively thriving church experience, and then we all got married, started having kids, and then things got kind of slow. And so then we changed our focus. You know, we're about the adults, so we had a children's ministry, and we started to minister to the adults. And then we stagnated. We didn't grow for probably close to 15, 20 years, somewhere in that time frame. We were a home church, about 30 people during that time. And then our kids grew up, got to high school age. They went into high school, and we started a high school ministry patterned after the way they do it in Columbus. And it exploded. It was the most fantastic thing I've ever been a part of in my life. It was great. So then, guess what? Now we're focused on the youth, and we're not paying attention to the adults. And then now we have a lot of young singles who are getting married and starting to have kids. And they're going into adulthood as well. And the whole cycle is going to repeat itself if we're not careful, right? Next. In this case, we were never stable. And so we kept losing people and having struggles growing all the time because we kept shifting our model. Next slide. This is what we feel should be the focus demographically, which is we have three different models up here, three different ways of operating. Instead of focusing just on the youth and trying to apply a youth model to the whole church, we have three. So we have something called engaging older adults. You know, me and some other people are involved in that. I'm 62 years old. I have a grandson. I'm in the older group. I have a lot of experience, and what I don't want is to be sequestered into this group of old people that are just waiting to retire and age, and, well, you know what happens, right? Not my idea of a good way to finish off my life. But that's the way things tend to go. We're going to try to prevent that. I'm going to try to prevent that as much as I can, God willing. But the main thrust here, the big difference, is helping families thrive. And over the last several years, decades maybe, we have been really focused on the youth and actually been very successful at that. But now we have lots of families, lots of kids. And so we need to be able to service them. And we can't go through the pattern that we've had in the past of just ignoring it, right? These are a viable group. And so what this is there's really more than one model that we need to develop. The young model, the youth model, I think it's doing pretty good so far. Don't see any big need to change that. It's not fixed, don't break it. But we do need to work on the young families and the older adults to get them more involved. Next. Yes, equal importance. Everybody is equally important. Why is that? Next slide. This goes back to Ephesians, right? As each part does its work, not as the youth do their thing and grow, not as the old people do their thing and grow, not as a family that they do and grow. Everybody needs to be a part of this church, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to do that. Next slide, please. The second model is our structural model. This one is probably going to be the most significant. I got Psalms 127. Next slide. Unless the Lord builds this house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards a city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is futile for you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives to his beloved sleep. That's not a typo. It's just an odd wording when they translate it. Basically what he's saying is that this is how he gives sleep to those he loves. That's a better way of saying it, right? So what's going on here? What's the Bible saying? Is it's God that builds the house. So if we don't build in a way that God honors, or that if we're not in sync with God's will, it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean we won't try, but it'll be in vain. Waking up early, going to sleep late. Next. And so this is what, when I say traditional, I mean traditional Xenos Freedom Fellowship. This is the model that we've followed for years, decades actually. Next. Next slide. Sorry. Okay. A little bit of explanation. First of all, my brain is not keeping up with what's going on in the front. So that's okay. We can go. I think it makes a lot of sense. Up in the top left, you have the old home church model, right? So you have a home church, and in that home church, you have a couple of cells. So the two C's, they're not carbon atoms, they mean cell groups, right? There's two cell groups in this home church. So you got a group of people and a couple of cell groups. And what's supposed to happen? They're supposed to grow. When they grow, they get bigger. That's the bigger circle. And then we get multiple cells. Now we got maybe some more cell groups. More people, more cell groups. And then you get to a point where you get too big, so you're going to split. Right? And then somebody's got to decide how you're going to split. So there's a little bit of social engineering that has to happen to figure out who's going to go where, and then ultimately you split. Now you have two churches, right? And up here, I call this the growth split model. By the way, this is real common. If you read the church literature, this is not unusual at all. It's a growth evangelical focus. You use this structure when you're trying to grow, particularly if you want to grow fast. You know, double, all that kind of stuff. The home church is split when the outgrows its resources. It's split along cell group lines, and it causes relational splits. And ultimately, it limits relational closeness. Because people keep, making friends, split friends, and after a while, they resist building deep relationships in the first place because they know they're going to be split up at some point in the future. And that's a weakness. So it's got a strength and a weakness. Next slide. And then we have probably the big distinction between the way Xenos did it, Freedom Fellowships and other churches, that when we say home church back in the day on this model, we meant a church, a fully functioning church. So the leaders of the church were basically mini elders. They had full responsibility for that church. The cell group leaders would be groomed to be the next home church leaders, so when they split. And then the big issue is, in order to pull this off, you need a lot of gifting. Well, some of these groups are only like 15, 20 people, right? So you may have a gifted teacher, or you may have a gifted evangelist, or this or that. But if there's like 23 different gifts that God gives, there aren't even enough people in the church to get each gift, right? So it demands a lot of gifting. And that typically is just not what happens. I will make a caveat about this. I am being negative because I'm talking about the adult experience here. In the youth, like the high school, the college, and some of the young adults, this model actually works great. It's a high growth environment. They get a lot of evangelism focus. They're used to splitting and growing and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't bother them that much. But when you are in an adult setting, things start going slowly. You don't have the high growth that you're used to, right? You're used to a slower environment. And you don't have all the energy it takes to, support all this activity. But this is the way we've always done things. And we applied this model to everybody. Adults, I think there were some exceptions in like the kindergarten, first grade. But other than that, this one model was applied everywhere. Next slide. So the church as a whole, here's my little description here. Notice all the little home churches in there. Can you see that? Cute, right? Next slide. We were a federation of home churches, a group of home churches, right? And we were unified through a common meeting. We had various ministries that we had, and you see those big bubbles. One of those says CT, that's this. We call it Essential Teaching. But we had classes, and we had Burden, Oasis for the young kids, LTC for people who wanted deep learning, et cetera, et cetera. And the number of home churches grew through the grow split model. And the home churches were self-supporting, right? This is important because if you're trying to grow your home church, what are you not doing? What you're not doing is worrying about the other home churches, right? Why? They're doing their own thing. They're growing. So why worry about what their situation is? You need to worry about your own situation, your own home church, right? And so that kind of caused a little bit of a structure where everybody ended up with the same people for sometimes decades, right? Actually, I like those people. The point is, there's a whole bunch of other people I like too, right? But I got to stay in my little my silo here. Keep going. Yep. So members tend to stay with their leaders, right? So the whole idea was your home church would grow, then you would be a leader, so on and so forth. So you tended to be in the same sphere of influence for your entire experience of the church. Next. It didn't work that well with the adults. Like I said, the young, it worked fine, but not the adults. And if you look at all those home churches in there, those didn't come from adult home churches growing and splitting. That's just not how it worked. It was too slow, right? So all the home churches that we have came from the college ministry. They're the young people that came up through high school and the college ministry and stayed. That's where all the other home churches came from. So it's a model. It has some strengths. It has some weaknesses. But it was applied to everybody indiscriminately. So next one up. See if anybody can identify with this. Again, it is futile for you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives his beloved sleep. All right? So if you're trying to make a church grow and it just ain't growing, but the pressure is to grow, you need to grow, you need to split. That's how it works. What do? What's the problem? Is God not honoring it? Or is it the people in the church? Are they lazy? Do they don't know what they're doing? Are they ungifted? What's the problem? I'm going to submit that all of those things could be the problem. But the primary problem with the adults, I believe, is this was just not going to work. And so we were working in futility, trying to make something work that just wasn't working. Next slide. Yes. Next slide. He's getting the idea. Stop. Okay. So, again, we're a federation of, I'm going to call these fellowship groups. And notice there's different structures, and the cute little bubbles look a little bit differently. There's still a couple of home churches in there with the 2 cell groups off to the side. But there's also some home churches in the lighter blue that don't have cell groups. And then there's some other groups. There's ministry houses. That's the MH for ministry house. Discipleship movement groups, maybe like a DBS. These are evangelical groups where you have a small group of people that you're evangelizing. And then we have an EG, which is an experimental group. Who knows what's going on there? But somebody's trying something out, right? Something new. See if it works. One more? Yes. So, these groups are unified through the common meeting, like we said, supported by various functions and ministries. Notice there's a new bubble. Do you guys notice this? There's a new bubble. So that's kind of an experimental thing that we're working on. Keep that in your mind, along with my dad. What did I say? My dad. I credited my dad with my salvation. So we see a freedom from fixed structures. Easier to move between groups if need be, and makes it easier for people to utilize their gifts. And then we have all under the supervision of the elders. And this is important because depending on how you take this, you may think this is a free-for-all, right? Anybody can go out and do whatever they want whenever they want. That's not the case. We need to have some order. Next slide. Excuse me. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians 14:33, for God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. Right? And so what was happening at this point was that the Corinthian church was out of control. You go into the meeting and it was very confusing. It was hard to figure out what was going on. And so Paul said, this is not good. You need to have some order. Right? Next slide. Now I'm going way back, right? But this is the best example I can think of. This is Moses. Moses was leading like 1 million people or something like that, huge number of people. And they would have issues, and when they had an issue, they'd bring it to him. Well, if you have like 1 million people, how many issues do you think you have, right? So Moses was buried under just trying to keep people happy. And so his father-in-law said, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. Work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen to me. I'll give you some advice. Next slide. But select capable men from all of the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but you have them bring very difficult case to you. The simple cases, they can decide themselves, right? How many people went to the deacon meeting, the deacon class? You guys remember that? Yeah, there's a couple. Seemed like a lot more when I was there. I think some people were there and aren't raising their hand. right? So deacons are roles, right? In the old model, it was like a career progression, let's put. So now, being a deacon is just a role. But that's what we're doing, right? So we're going to have deacons, and the deacons can handle the stuff down where they can handle it, right? At home church level or at some group level. And then they have accountability to the elders, right? So we do have a structure in place. Now, not every group would need to have a structure. So Burl Covan has a couple of guys he's reaching out to, and he asked me if I wanted to be part of a disciple with DBS group, Discovery Bible Study. I said yes, and so there's 4 of us. Do we need a deacon overseeing that little group? I don't think so, right? But we belong to home church, maybe a couple home churches, so there are deacons involved that can supervise what's going on, make sure that everything's going well, and that they can be accountable to the elders. So, next slide. There it is. A true work of art. You know how long it took to make this? Wait till you see the next slide. Okay. So this is I made this really busy on purpose. Relax. We're not going to go through all the little bubbles and arrows. Right? So we have home churches, and like I said up here, your home church is really your base, right? That's your group of people that you fellowship with, that you study with, that you're doing life with, right? And hopefully you really like your home church, and you want to stay in your home church. But that's your home base. That's where you reside in our church, so to speak. But there's a lot of other activities you can do. And what I wanted to point out, that some of these activities have people from multiple home churches, right? So this is a discipleship Bible study, small Bible study. Is it evangelical focus? Well, maybe you have a guy from a home church, another guy from a different home church, but they both know these people, right? So why not get together and have an EBS, right? We've got ministry houses that might be part of a church. If you want to have a cell, go for it. There's no reason not to have one, right? You want to have some sort of study group with multiple people from different churches, fine, you can do that. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. The only thing you want to keep in mind is you do actually have a home base, right? You're not free-flowing throughout the whole church, showing up unannounced at people's homes at the wrong time because you're not really part of the church and you missed the memo. And if we're successful and every part is doing its work, then we would expect to grow. So start clicking through some of these. You'll see what I mean. So all these different pieces and parts, stop? Okay, yeah, good. Right, so these are the pillars, right? Healing, loving, making disciples, proclaiming. These are all the pillars we're talking about. And the idea is that we have the flexibility, we have the freedom to be able to execute those pillars in an unstructured way. You don't have to worry about your structure getting in the way of you doing something that you have a burden or a gifting for. Next. There it is. Obeying Jesus. It gives us all more freedom to be able to use our gifts to obey Jesus. I gotta keep up. Okay. Next. So here we are. If we're all using our gifts, what happens? Next. Oh, we grow. We get bigger. What if all these people use their gifts? What happens? Oh, yeah. Nice. What if these people all use those gifts? What happens? Anybody want to guess how many times I'm going to do this? He couldn't wait. This is it, right? You get the idea, right? You use your gifts. It should cause growth because that's what Christ said. All right, next. This will be a brief one. This is not a teaching on discipleship, but I wanted to show a pretty well, I think nifty model. But first we're going to talk about the concept. So there's Titus. But as for you, proclaim the things which are fitting for sound doctrine. Older men are to be temperate, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, love, and perseverance. Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips or enslaved by much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. Likewise, urge the young men to be sensible in all things. Show yourself to be an example of good deeds, with purity and doctrine, dignified, sound in speech, which is beyond reproach, so that the opponent will be put to shame, having nothing bad to say about us. This is a pretty simple concept. The people that are more mature disciple the people that are less mature. Next. Hopefully you can see this. This is pretty obvious, I think. I'm probably walking off the video, but this is maturity. The higher the arrow, the more mature you are. This is a ministry field, meaning here's all the places that you could minister with your maturity. Next. Whoa. I did the same thing. Yeah. Sorry. If you wonder why I'm stepping so far back from the screen, it's because I'm farsighted. I'm blind without my reading glasses. So, more mature disciple, the less mature, because the mature have more to offer, right? A similar level of maturity limits your growth, right? So if you're in a relationship with another Christian and you're both of the same maturity level, you can study, you can edify, you can have fellowship, but you're not going to gain much more than you already have, because they're no more mature than you are, right? The goal is to foster progressive maturity throughout life. So you start young, and you go through your life, and the longer you live, the older and wiser you get. This is assuming that you're Christian at a young age, and that you continue your walk for your entire life. There are exceptions. Sometimes you get an older person that becomes a Christian and doesn't know anything, is immature, and so even the young person would be able to give him, instruction. And sometimes there are young people that are just gifted. God decides to gift these people. Timothy is a good case of this, if you're familiar with Timothy in the New Testament. So this does exist. So if you're in a position where you want to disciple somebody, then you want to find somebody that you can actually give some insight to, not a fellow peer, right? What if you don't have any peers? Or what if you have only peers? Is a better way of saying it. Well, then that would be a good time to go looking for somebody new, right? Either somebody in a different fellowship group, or better yet, evangelize somebody. Go out and proclaim the word of God, and then you'll have somebody that you can disciple. Next. All right. Here's the money slide. Now we're going to be talking about families, helping families thrive. And this is the second part of Psalms 127. And I remember before we had kids, me and my wife, Kathy, we actually asked the question, do we want to have children? The world was going to hell in a handbasket back then, just like it is today. Right? And so you had to ask the question, do I want to have a child? Do I want to bring a young life into this evil world? And we had the choice, right? We didn't get pregnant accidentally. And so we had to ask ourselves this question. We're both males, by the way, so this is something we do. So let's read this. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with the enemies in the gate. There's some odd wording in this. Apologize for that. There's no way to clean it up. But the main point here, 2 points, I guess. One, they're a blessing from God, right? If God wants to give you children, consider it a blessing. It's a good thing to have kids. Amen. Nowhere in the Bible do I read it's a bad idea to have kids. Somebody probably has a verse or two in mind that might contradict that. But we're going to ignore that for right now. The Bible is very family-oriented and definitely promotes having families, right? But the second one is what hit me. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior. What's a warrior? What does a warrior do? I don't need to explain this, right? What are the weapons of a warrior? Right? And so, being a man, this was my verse, right? I am a spiritual warrior. You know, like the song Onward Christian Soldiers. You know, we are in a spiritual war. And I'm a warrior. And my children can be an extension of that. So having children actually increases my impact, right? I only have 2, unfortunately. You'd have to ask them about that, but I don't have a full, huge quiver, but I tell you what, I've got 2 really straight, sharp arrows. And God's right. Children are a gift to the Lord, right? And so I am very pleased with how God has blessed me. I'm glad I had kids. I really am. And that's the way I think we should all view this. Not just people who are having the kids, but all of us, everybody in the church. You know, to see these young lives come into existence and have the opportunity to train them up it's a blessing. It's a joy to be part of that. Now, going back, remember we talked about demographics, then we talked about structure, then we talked about maturity, right? So demographically, here's where we're at. I don't want to throw the numbers out exactly. You can look at it. Over half of what we have in attendance in this church on a regular basis are families. And so if you look at this largest group, 30 to 50 is where the families reside. Not everybody in here is in a family. But look at that all the way at the end, the preschool. See how big that is? And the unborn, I had, the Shoofs had twins, so I had to move 2 from the unborn up to the, so it's accurate up to this point. So what do you think's going to happen, right? The good news is we got lots of time. It's going to take a little while for this to happen. These kids don't grow up instantly. Seems like it when you're 62, but they don't grow up instantly, right? The other thing I just wanted to make a side note. Remember when I was talking about how our old model would produce Christians from the young, but we'd lose the adults? See the divot? You know what this divot is? Where the orange? It didn't used to be a divot. So we lost some of our older people, and they took their kids with them through some turmoil we had before, right? And part of the reason was they were in a model that wasn't working right. And they had some other issues too. So if you don't have a model that works for the adults, you will lose them. But anyway, that's in the past. We have a future. Look at that big baby bump down at the end. And you know, people keep getting married. And maybe this 10 unborn kids may never change, as we find out. It's like every day somebody else is expecting, right? Structure. Accommodate family life. Go ahead and click view a few times here. Right. So basically what I'm saying here is I don't have a specific structure that we think that families should have. Like, your home church has to be structured a certain way, right? But what we do expect is that when you do form your home groups, that you're going to minimize wasted effort and do things that really focus on what you're trying to do. And that could vary a little bit from church to church. Not every home church is going to have the exact same thing that they're trying to do. But some examples here. One would be teaching methods. You have the old traditional way of teaching is very time consuming. If you're going to teach, you may have to spend hours studying. And what if you're not really that good at it? Now you're going to spend a week studying. You're going to want to know what your passage is 2 weeks ahead of time. And then you're going to read it and think and struggle with it for 2 weeks before you finally get up and deliver it. That's a lot of effort. There's ways of teaching and speaking the Word of God that doesn't have to be a full-blown expository Bible teaching. And we've been using this in the old group, where we've settled on kind of a discussion format, and we don't need to prepare a lot ahead of time. Now, we have a lot of mature people, right? So you do need to have the ability to tell if somebody's discussing something and they bring something up that's not biblically correct. You may have to correct them. But that works really well, and it has a pretty low overhead. It doesn't require a lot of teaching, preparation, right? You can focus on fellowship and relationship building. Maybe you want to have some groups inside of your home church. Maybe you want to sell, that's good. Maybe a Bible study, a prayer group, whatever it is that you think you need to satisfy the vision of what you guys want to do in your home church. And evangelism and outreach. There's simple things like a Discovery Bible study, moms group, sports, scouts, group activities. When we were way back when the kids were young, Kathy joined this, what was that thing called? The babysitting co-op, was that it? The preschool parents. And so they had all these activities and stuff. It wasn't part of the church, but she was out there with these people, and she would be able to talk to them. And she actually won a family, right, to our church, and that person became saved. So there are evangelical opportunities there. And trust me, when you talk about sports, scouts, some of these things, you're going to be involved in it, whether you want to or not. Your kids are going to want to be in sports. Not all of them, but a lot of them will, right? And so then you're going to have the opportunity to meet a lot of different people, right? And so you can use these as opportunities. So if you have the freedom, the flexibility to focus on something like that, because you're not stressing over teaching or some leaders meeting where you're trying to figure out how you're going to split the church when it grows, or figuring out why you're not growing or whatever, you can focus on things like this. And the communal things, like the pray and play. Has anybody here been to one of those? I have not. I hear it's a good thing, right? So the elders didn't think this up. This is a suggestion from somebody in our church, and the reports are pretty good. People liking it, right? Picnics, outings, and things like that. And I would say that really, if you do this and bring the kids into it, so that they're into the church, the structure of the church, introducing them to the church. And here's my last slide. Don't get ahead of yourself. So just a little, I'm not going to get too deep into this. That black line is your influence as a parent. And whether you like it or not, you're fully responsible for that kid up until about elementary school. It's all you. And as they get older, they start going into higher education, like middle school. And then they start contacting, teachers, other kids, coaches, things like this. They get some input from outside, right? And they get on a bus, 6, 7, whatever it is, and they don't come home until 3:30 or something like that. they're spending the whole day under the complete influence of somebody else. They get to high school, and that's when the separation starts. That can be tumultuous for some people. It can be pure joy for others. But in high school is when they start breaking away, right? And now they're starting to pick and choose. This is what I'm going to follow. This is the group I'm going to be part of, right? And they get into college. You get the picture, right? So by the time they're in college, your input is paying the bills. And then after that, you're pretty much done, right? So if you have that blue line, this is where the church can come in and provide some assistance, right? So if we have a middle school ministry and a high school ministry, now you have people that you can trust that are godly, that are influencing your kids, right? So when your influence is starting to go down, we want to provide the opportunity for the church to add their influence, right? To help them grow. By the way, we've done this before. This was the youth model that I was talking about that works really well. And a lot of you came from that. But if you have the church, you have spies, right? I had to use some spies once. I'm not going to name names. But somebody I disagreed with what they were doing. And so I had somebody to talk to about it. I had somebody that had earned their trust in the church to talk about it. And they talked about it. And the situation was remedied. And they didn't like it, but it worked out well. And in retrospect, I think everybody agrees it was the right thing to do, right? If I didn't have that to rely on, I would have been just out of luck. I'd have to, ground, take away car privileges, everything I could, right? But if you know anything about 17-year-old boys and 15-year-old girls, that's mostly futile. I was a 17-year-old boy with a 15-year-old girlfriend once, and trust me, you would not be able to tell me to do anything other than what I wanted to do. And frankly, it was the same with her. I don't want to get into that too much. But that's the idea, right? This is the idea. Next slide. Okay, back one. Okay. First, parents evangelize your children. Remember, what is it about my dad I told you to remember? He's the reason I was saved. Evangelize your children. That's way simpler than it might sound, because they are going to follow you. If you're leading a godly life, they're going to follow in your footsteps. If you're not, they're not. If you're not, but you tell them to do it anyway, they're going to see the hypocrisy. And when they get to high school, you're going to have a problem, right? So evangelize your kids. That would count. Yes, Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So that's the goal. All your parents, it's on you. Next. Yes. And then we have, no thank you. So then we have, our minister, or, the younger discipling, or the older discipling the younger, right? Middle schoolers working in elementary school, high schoolers working in middle school, college working in high school, right? You get the idea. Especially in middle school, those kids really look up to the high schoolers. So when you have a high schooler who's godly, who's teaching a younger kid or working with them, they look up to him, right? Remember my spy? That's what my spy was. So this is how that maturity model works in practice, right? So we can keep maturing the younger people, right? And that should continue throughout our life, really. Next one. Up one, sorry. Yes. Yes, mentoring. Remember the big bubble I told you to remember? Just because you're all grown up and you have kids now, there's no reason not to expect there might be somebody in this church that has been through something you're struggling with, right? Why not utilize the knowledge and the maturity that we have amongst the older people? And they don't have to be like me, 62-year-old granddad. It can be somebody, a lot younger, but somebody that knows some things, somebody's been through some things. That's what that's all about. And this is kind of experimental. We're just going down this path to see how it works. But the idea is you should always have somebody available that has more knowledge, more experience than what you have. And so finally we provide a path to continue growth during what I call the breakaway phase, right? So you can keep your kids in a church, right? You can keep your kids growing spiritually all the way from the time they enter Oasis, the Sunday school stuff, all the way up to going into college and going into adulthood. And that's the grand plan, so to speak. Next slide. We're done. Thank you. You're probably saying, no, thank you. We're done. All right, so that was a lot to cover, right? But we just wanted to give you guys an overview of where this is going, right? So there's been a lot of things said, a lot of words, some teaching, but we just wanted to give a little bit of structure, some pictures to how do you visualize what we're trying to do. I should say, I keep using the word we. I'm not an elder, right? So the elders asked me to come up and present this. I'm part of what's called SALT, the Servant and Leadership Team. But we did talk this over with the elders, so when I say we, that's what I'm talking about, is SALT. And the elders did agree that this is a good thing. And we prayed about it a lot. We did a lot of research. We thought about it. This was not something that just came out of somebody's brain one day. This took several months to put together. So. All right, so I think we do questions or comments. Do we have any?